Hello, and salutations, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is James Wiley, and I'm an exhibitions assistant here at V&A Dundee. In today's lunchtime talk session, we are joined by Bashabi Fraser. Dr Bashabi Fraser, CBE, Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing and Director of the Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies at Edinburgh and Napier University. Bashabi is also a contributing member of V&A Dundee's Scottish Design Galleries Advisory Group. Bashabi will consider the role that is the durable fabric and skein played in the economic and colonial histories of Dundee and Calcutta. From exploring jute's journey via the rivers of each nation, the Tay and the Hoogly, to reflecting on its influence on contemporary design and its potential as a material in a world threatened by climate crises, Bashabi will examine the histories and the possibilities of jute. Before I invite Bashabi to join us, I will draw your attention to some Zoom functions available to use this afternoon. If you'd like to use the closed captions, please enable this using the CC button located on the bar at the bottom of your screen. Details on how to use these features have been posted in the chat. Questions are certainly welcomed and encouraged. You can share your questions for our attention through Bashabi's presentation using the Q&A function located at the bottom of the bar of your screen. We shall address these at the end of Bashabi's presentation. And finally, if you're going to chat about this event online, we do encourage and we'd love you if you could tag us at V&A Dundee. Anywho, that's all from me, and now I'll hand over to our guest speaker today, Dr. Bashabi Fraser.
Good morning, and thank you very much, James, for that wonderfully generous introduction. It is both an honor and privilege to be doing this talk at the V&A Dundee, and I'm very grateful to Emma McCarthy, James Wiley, and Sally Gregg Lockwood for the invitation to speak today and for facilitating this talk. I would also like to recognize Troy Nelson and James Hussey, who are technically managing this whole session behind the scenes. I'm going to try and screen share, but just a minute. So if you'll bear with me, I'll carry on while I screen share. So here we are. Today, the title of my talk is Tale of Jute, A Tale of Two Cities, the Jutopolises of Empire. I'll be using both the spellings, one with an E and without an E. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Meredith Moore, the curator of the V&A, who with Michael Morris and Emma Bond first reached out to me and involved me in the thought-provoking and meaningful transnational Scotland decolonization project, which has shaped the museum's narrative to fit the times in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. It has thrown fresh light on social injustices, silences, and gaps which have embodied the non-recognition of the contribution to civilization, art, and culture of the wider world. These lunchtime talks are part of this effort to rectify past omissions in what we, the general public, recognize and value as positive action. Today, I will be concentrating on the story of jute in Scotland and its links to India, and trace its journey, which begins in undivided Bengal in India, where this crop was grown and still is grown, harvested, and processed into jute sacks, also known as gunny bags. Ropes, twine, string, and burlap, gunny cloth, also known as hessian, and bags used for packaging, and jute that is used for floor covering. This talk will cover the story of jute in two cities of empire. Dundee, which you saw in the earlier slide, that was the inner city. Dundee, which, as we all know, is on the of Tay on the east coast of Scotland and Calcutta, which is on the Hoogly, a distributary of the mighty Ganga, the Ganges. In Deltaig, Bengal, in northeast India, it will show how this durable fabric and skein wove the economic history of these two port cities in an intimate tale of interdependence. It will also consider how the two rivers in each nation will, on the Hoogly, a distributor of the mighty Ganga River in Deltaig, Bengal, in East India, and grew this durable fabric and skein. Sorry, I seem to have moved on to the economic history of these two port cities in an intimate tale of interdependence. It will also consider how the two rivers in each nation, the Tay and the Hoogly, played a crucial role in the journey that jute made as a product of global value. It will also reflect on how relevant jute remains in a world threatened by climate change, where a sustainable environment can be supported by a return to, even a revival of jute products in many areas. It will explore the possibility of jute's influence on contemporary design and its multiple uses that could signify a pertinent message coming from the heart of V&A Dundee. Why was this apparently unsexy product so significant and valuable in the world over 2 centuries, beginning in the 18th and right into the early 20th? And why should we be thinking of reviving it again now? It is not sophisticated like silk, fashionable like linen, or comfortable like cotton. But like all three, it's a natural fiber. Jute is sturdy, hard-wearing, and inexpensive, and hence affordable. However, there is another twist in the tale of jute production. Jute was a commercial crop, a cash crop, and hence lucrative. Like indigo and opium poppy plants in colonial times, all of which were forcibly made to replace cropland of food grains like rice, pulses or lentils, and sustaining vegetables. So smallholding farmers who were earlier able to survive on sustainable farming were forced by the East India Company to turn their land, mainly paddy fields, over to jute plantations, and farmers became laborers on land they might have earlier owned and farmed. Moreover, jute is a thirsty crop. As you can see, it's standing in water like rice. But while rice is a food staple and needs ankle-deep water, jute is inedible and needs knee-deep water to grow in. The heavy cultivation of jute leads to a shortage of fresh water in a land known to be fertile, in what is a riverine terrain. And this leads to the denuding of the soil, which cannot easily be recovered as primary land to grow food crops. As I said earlier, the story of jute is the tale of two cities. Jute had always been grown in Bengal, and during colonial times, its predominance meant that the processing factories mushroomed in and around Calcutta, now Kolkata, along the river Hoogly. I will refer to the city as Calcutta because I'm looking at a time when it was Calcutta. Calcutta was the British capital of British India till 1911-12, and the second city of empire, which Glasgow would like to contest. Various crops like cotton and jute, which were grown in India, were gradually transported as raw material to be processed in the factories of Britain, and making India the producer of the crops and the raw material to feed British factories, thus putting a stop to major industrial growth in India. The narrative of jute in Dundee goes back to the spinning and export of flax in the 1790s, and the subsequent discovery in 1833 of the process of soaking jute fiber in whale oil to soften it, which enabled Dundee to switch from flax production to the more profitable production of jute. The first jute mill in Dundee opened in 1838, and the 1840s saw a boom in jute production in Dundee's factories when half of the city's population worked in her jute mills. The Eagle Mill is just one of the many jute mills that opened in Dundee. At the peak of its prosperous jute manufacturing days, Dundee had 130 mills operating. It came to be known as the Jutopolis, the metropolis of jute, a commodity that she sold in the local and global market, dealing in several jute products, especially sacks. The success story of jute manufacturing in the mills of Dundee is a well-known story. In a city which is strategically located on the Tay, Scotland's longest river, where the river is at its widest. The story of jute is not just the story of two cities, as we noted before, but also the story of two great rivers, which played a crucial role in the journey of the raw jute bales, which left the banks of the Hoogly to arrive at the shores of Tay in Dundee. I trace this commercial connection between the Tay and the Ganga, the Ganges, as you call it in the West, in my epic poem, From the Ganga to the Tay, 2009 publication, which is a conversation between the two rivers, which left the banks of the Hoogly to arrive on the shores of Tay in Dundee. But the two cities never really shared the same prosperity at the same time. From the Ganga to the Tay is a conversation between two rivers, reflecting on a shared history through time. Theirs was a seesaw relationship, where Dundee's heyday meant a decline of economic gains for Calcutta and vice versa. With the outbreak of the Crimean War in October 1853, sandbags were in great demand, and it was considered cheaper to produce bags where the crop was grown, and this is the cloth that produced the bags. The links between the two metropolises, the Jutopolises, were also forged by people in the jute industry in Bengal and in Scotland. A group of Dundonian workers in Bengal opened a jute mill in Srirampur. Sorry, I just need to go forward a little. That is the Srirampur jute mill, which is called Serampur in Anglo-Indian literature, which is on the south bank of the Hoogly. This was opened in 1855, beginning a new chapter in the history of jute production. Jute, like tea, was now processed where it grew in India. And both industries, tea and jute, were dominated by Scots. The jute mills in Calcutta were linked to Scottish firms. Dundonians found it easier to rise quickly up in the ranks in Calcutta in the jute industry, and both their salaries and lifestyle were more attractive than they were at home. However, the Great Indian Revolt, as we call it in revisionist history, which is often referred to as the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857, led to the Crown taking over the land dominated and controlled by the East India Company in 1858. The same year, Indian manufacturers ordered factory machinery from Dundee. And once they found that labor could be cheaply bought in India, the scales turned as jute manufacturing grew in India at the cost of Dundonian production. The jute barons were able to make fortunes which became evident in the remittance money sent home and the manor houses built along the Tay. The Bengal jute industry trained Indian foremen and employed Indian doctors. But the owners, managers, engineers, and technicians were all Scots, till Indian business houses like the Birlas joined the industry. Yet the Scots were never part of the imperial framework during the Raj, like their Oxbridge or Sandhurst trained British counterparts, who were civil servants and military personnel in India, respectively. This is something I write about in a chapter entitled The Scottish Jutewaller, published in the book Within and Without Empire, Scotland Across Post-Colonial Borderline, published in 2013, where I look at the transnational positioning of Scots through oral narratives. And here is another jute mill, Victoria Jute Mill on the Hoogly. Their compound life was real. You can see the walls around the compound. The walls providing a sanctuary as well as a boundary between the walled Scottish enclave and Indian civilian life. While the Scots did sit at commercial board meetings, they were not considered quite pucka, like the very product they manufactured and sold. They retained an insider-outsider status in India, never welcome at the elitist Bengal Club or Toligant Club, but allowed to fraternize at the Calcutta Swimming Club and the Saturday clubs. Even within the jute mill compound, there was a class hierarchy, and Eugenie Fraser, in her book, in her memoir, A Home by the Hoogly, published in 1991, recalls this, where the wives of the senior management did not visit the junior officials' wives and vice versa, unless the junior wives were actually invited by the senior management wives. Though the children of both Scottish and Indian personnel played together within the compounds. In a way, jute was a skein that wove Scots abroad, mainly from and around Dundee, together in a close-knit community, which operated with a solid front both locally and internationally. They were able to utilize the imperial network of banking, insurance, transportation by river, railways, and shipping to America, Africa, and Australia, and influence and control the world trade in jute. Operating from Calcutta at the cost of dwindling production from Dundee. Dundee thus faced serious competition from Calcutta, from Scottish jutewallers in the second city of empire. After 1904, the jute capital shifted economically to Calcutta. It was the golden crop. However, when First World War broke out, there were 38 jute mills in Calcutta with 184,000 workers, which included 1,000 Scots. The demand for jute floundered as the transportation of goods from Calcutta to the world was jeopardized by enemy interception at sea and on land. Jute was no longer the golden crop, its durability unable to withstand the destruction wrought by a man-made catastrophe, the war. The formation of Pakistan on 14 August 1947 and of India regaining her identity on 15 August 1947, that famous midnight hour, also brought in Indian partition, which divided Bengal. So 1/3 of Bengal fell within India and 2/3 in East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh. This led to further complications as the jute industry was, like cotton and other crops, partitioned, with the growing land for the crop going to East Pakistan, or Bangladesh today, for jute, and the factories being stranded in West Bengal in India. So here you see another mill compound with the jute personnel quarters and the factory in background. Yet, like the crop itself, jute has made a steady and sturdy return to the manufacturing scene and the global market, a modest revival of a reliable fiber. It is true that the mills in Dundee have now ground to a halt, but many of the factories along the Hoogly in and around Calcutta and in Bangladesh have reopened, and the production arcades have welcomed jute products both locally and globally, showing how they can be resurrected from their past success story and graduate to a booming future befitting today's urgent demand for a sustainable environment. The commercial production of jute in Dundee ended in the 1970s, after the cessation of jute control in 1969, and the last spinner stopped in 1999. However, I must also stress that Scots did not immediately leave India after Indian independence in 1947. Many of them were invited to stay back, both in the jute and the tea industry, to hand over the know-how to Indian personnel. And many of them were there till definitely in the 1960s, and one or two even in the 1970s. But right now, the 130 mills of Dundee are silent. The story of Dundee's jute story is documented and held, as we all know, in Verdant Works Museum, located in a refurbished mill. And I love that building. Its very name signifying the story it encapsulates of an eco-friendly cash crop that is fine-tuned to a green environment. I make it a point to revisit Verdant Works Museum from time to time to remind me of a past that links my two nations, Scotland and India, through the weave and warp of jute. A film about the 3 J's of Dundee, which give the city a global reputation, jute, jam, and journalism, was made by a citizen of Dundee, Daphne Barbieri, with footage she took herself in Dundee and Calcutta, which has been screened in Caird Hall in Dundee. Her son, Simon, has established a collaborative business with a jute factory in India, where he designs bags and other everyday products which have been sold in various events that celebrate the Scottish-Indian links. The decolonization labels at the V&A did much towards telling the story of jute in another light, to borrow the title of a novel by Andrew Gregg, which is a biographical novel telling the story of his father in colonial times. It shows, Simon's story shows how in any story of empire and in any story of jute, in this particular case, and tea and any products that link Scotland and India, there is always the other side, always. This is a line taken from Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, spoken by the character Antoinette. The revisionist perspective encapsulates the commitment to retelling the full story of Dundee and Calcutta, and the role they played in the jute trade in a revised label at the V&A today, which affirms, and I quote from the V&A label, Dundee built ships brought the raw fiber to the city from Bengal, where it was grown by peasants or ryots in the Ganges River Delta. One revised label describes raw jute being imported from British-ruled Bengal, now part of Bangladesh and India, unquote, bringing the political history of partitioned and emergent nations involved in jute production up to date. It also acknowledges that while the industry brought prosperity to Dundee, it was at the cost of, and I quote from the V&A label, at considerable hardship to exploited workers in Bengal. The fact that jute is biodegradable makes it all the more valuable today as we confront the dire consequences of climate change as a result of global warming, which the COP26 summit in Glasgow earlier this month has brought home to us in no uncertain terms. Jute remains an affordable fabric, tough, versatile, and thus amazingly adaptable to creative designs and applications. The way forward could perhaps be to dispense with plastic bags once and for all, which are not biodegradable. I know some are recyclable, but which choke up our oceans. And this could be a first step so that they can be replaced with eco-friendly jute bags in supermarkets, which are sexed up to be attractive, colorful, but still practical. Complex packaging with plastic could be replaced with jute packets, bags, and sacks. And these coffee jute bags were really popular in colonial times and later. Through the years, I have used handbags, carpets, rugs, bedspreads, cushion covers, ropes, skipping ropes, string, tablecloths, and placemats made of jute in my everyday life. I have a family of three-dimensional owls adorning my bookshelves, a mama, papa, and a baby, beautiful handicrafts from India. And a friend once gifted me a beautiful sari made of jute, which could pass off as raw silk, which I still treasure. Maybe the V&A gallery could commission and request such items to be on display in future exhibitions, with some items remaining as part of her permanent exhibition. V&A shop could maybe stock some of these everyday items. I'm not exactly suggesting stocking jute silk saris, but goods and crafts which are inexpensive but highly desirable. And this entrepreneurial endeavor could start a new Art Nouveau movement here in Dundee. Sourced in Calcutta and sold in and promoted by Dundee in the UK and across the world. The items could be influenced and designed by Scottish artists to answer the needs and fit the taste of a Scottish market that could be popularized throughout a globalized world. And here you see women, I call them crafts women, making various jute items. And you can see the colors, the beauty, the aesthetics of the product. And as I say, making them very desirable. Then the story of jute, of a tale of two cities and of two rivers, threaded together through the skein of jute, a humble but dependable fiber, could come full circle and be completed in a commitment to a renewable product in a world of limitless possibilities. So shall we, from V&A Dundee, take a leadership role in promoting jute as an eco-friendly product which can replace a lot of the plastic that today really threatens our environment. And there is the beautiful museum, which I have enjoyed visiting many times and look forward to visiting again and again. And thank you to V&A Dundee for letting me do this talk, and to the audience for listening. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bashabi, for giving that most wonderful talk today. It was really such a pleasure to listen to, and I loved the points, the excellent entrepreneurial points that you did point at the end of your talk as well. Because I think that Dundee is such a, if there's anywhere that's going to, sell the idea of jute as a renewable product to the world, it should be a place like Dundee. So I might just pose a couple of questions to you. We do have one question here from the audience, and I'll just read it out. It's from Helen. And do you consider that workers in Indian jute factories and mills were exploited more than Scottish jute workers?
Their pay was very poor, I can say that. I think exploitation cannot necessarily be, weighed who was more exploited, who was less exploited, because the mills, even today, are open in India 24/7, and the workers are not really well paid. And I don't think women and children working in the jute industry in Dundee were well paid at all. So I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't try to say that they were more exploited in India than they were here. They definitely remained poor in India. They were poor in the jute mills. But I think what did happen was those who did migrate to the Hoogly, to the banks of the Hoogly, could quickly rise up, and they had a much better chance of becoming managers very quickly, and they did have a good lifestyle. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think exploitation is something that is relative. Depending on where you are, you're still exploited. Yeah. So my heart goes out to all workers, whether in Dundee or to Calcutta.
I think, answered that question really, really well. And I recall you in your talk, you spoke of that Scots Dundonians stayed behind after, post-independence in India and Pakistan. And did the same social partitions still pervade between Scots and Indian workers post-independence?
Actually, in both jute and tea, where the Scots dominated, initially there was a divide, a racial divide, and Indians couldn't rise up in the jute industry. But I think after independence, things became different gradually. It was more of an equalizer. I mean, we have to perhaps understand that before 1858, Brits in India and Indians mixed freely. They intermarried, within the same classes. So the aristocracy married the aristocracy, the middle classes married the middle classes, and the man on the street married, the soldier on the street married the common woman. Common is such an awful word, and I'm really sorry to use it, but I think the audience will forgive me for the want of a better word. So I think things did ease a lot, and as I said, I think one of the rare happenings was the children actually played together, the Indian and the Scottish children within the compound. So that was something that didn't exist anywhere else. In the tea industry, it was actually even more egalitarian, because the Scots actually had to rise from the bottom upwards, and so did the Indians. So I think that was there. I must also stress that that insider-outsider status perhaps made the Scots feel closer to the Indians, and the Indians closer to the Scots than they might have felt to those who were the imperialists, if I can put it that way, the empire builders.
Yeah. We do have another excellent question coming through from Maggie as well, who's asked, what do you know what is used to soften jute now in India, given that whale oil isn't used in Dundee?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I have to come back to Maggie. I was thinking just now that I really have to read up on that, so I can't answer that question. But I do know that, the silk sari I have and the tablecloth, I also should say, cushion covers are actually quite soft. They have the feel of not as soft as linen, but almost like a mixture of raw silk and cotton, if that makes sense. So can I come back about that? I'll read it up and I'll come back. And I'll also ask people in the industry in India. But something has to be used to soften it, I guess.
Of course. And do you think that the jute industry will continue to grow around Calcutta as our reliance on plastic subsides? And do you think there will, sorry, this is the second point to follow up, but do you think there will be the same problems that will arise through monoculture, through, land for foodstuffs being subsided?
Yeah, I think a lot of land has that was kind of given over to jute has tried to go back to food production, food crops. So I think jute will never be, a crop that replaces rice land, paddy, as we say. It's interesting how they're both golden. When they ripen, they're both golden, both paddy, rice, and jute. So I don't think we'll go back to that, but there is a lot of encouragement of the jute industry within India. I mean, as I showed you, the products are diverse, beautiful, and practical. So I think it will continue, not in the same vein as earlier, not the same amount of production, and definitely not replacing cropland. We've just had a 1-year-long farmer strike in India, where they were threatened with farm laws, which have now been repealed. And it was just that, the taking over of farmland by big business houses and controlled by them. So that kind of control, I don't think will happen in India. I hope not.
That's great. We do have another question coming through from Matthew Jarrett, and that is, I wonder if you know any research done on those from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh working in jute mills in Dundee post-war. The Abertay Historical Society is doing a project on history of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people in Dundee, and this is something we'd be very keen to find out more on.
Well, I know that I actually have seen a photograph of a dinner party where there are men in suits, and you look at them and they're actually all Indians. And when I say India, I mean subcontinentals, from Bangladesh and India. And they have actually come here to be trained in the jute industry. And it's interesting because I have done quite a lot of work in oral history doing interviews of Scots and who were in India. And they have told me how they have come across these Indians who, when the demand for jute waned long after, they had to diversify from being jute engineers to restaurateurs, the stereotypical roles that they could take up. So yes, I think there has been some work done, but not enough. I have a book called Ragas and Reels. It's a book of poetry with photographs by Herman Rodriguez. And Herman actually takes photographs, portraits of South Asians in Scotland. And he knows quite a lot of people who came here to train as jute engineers from the subcontinent and had to take up other work when that was no longer viable. And some of them are still here, much older maybe, but the next generation is here. So we could look at them.
Great. So that's something we could probably follow up with Matthew with. Well, it's a great question and a great answer, Bashabi. And you mentioned many items of jute that you've used in your everyday life, from placemats and curtains and such. Is there any specific recollections that you have of jute materials that you've used in your home? Because, well, personally speaking, I know one of when I was growing up and working on a farm, jute potato sacks I
Mm.
remember carrying them for a very young age on my back
Oh, wow.
across the farm sheds. So
Mm.
that's one thing that sticks with me. But I was wondering if there is anything that stuck with you, jute wise.
Yeah. Well, when I was, I was in London with my parents because they were researchers here at London School of Economics as Commonwealth Scholars. And when we went back, what struck me was there were no supermarkets. There were just these small grocery shops, and everything was in big sacks. Whether it was rice or lentils or potatoes or onions. So everything was in sacks. So, like you, I've seen sacks. The other thing was we bought sacks of rice because we come from a rice. Rice is the staple in Bengal. So we bought not in kilos, but in what we call mons, which is almost like a ton, So we bought rice in sacks, we bought dal in sacks, lentils. And the other thing I remember is that my mother was not too keen on carpets in India because of the dust. And of course, we didn't use hoovers. We had Indian floor brushes, and they did not pick up things from a carpet, normal, say, Persian carpet. So what we had were jute carpets, which were actually quite beautiful. And so I now realize they were hand woven, and you could really scrub them very easily and keep them clean. So jute carpets are something I remember, and like you, sacks, I do remember. And my skipping rope was jute, sorry, as a girl.
No, but that's great. It's great how, yeah, there's we can all sort of find a personal connection to jute, and especially, I guess, people in the locality to Dundee, they've had family who've worked in the industry, or like I guess myself coming from an agricultural background. And in your wonderful talk, you quote post-colonial literature, and there I delve into the vast body of work and poetry and writing that you've accomplished to date. Where do you find that your inspiration to write comes from as of recently, bearing in mind COVID-19 and such?
Yes, I think I can't say that I've woken up to climate change because my mother, who was a geographer, was actually a climatologist, and both my parents are human geographers as well as urban. And my mother also looked at demography. And many years ago, she told me how climate change was really worrying for the world. And she kept talking about climate change, and she taught climate change. So actually, I grew up with this whole fear of climate change. And my mother died in 2005. I have a book of poems called Letters to My Mother and Other Mothers, which I could only publish in 2015 because I found it difficult to write to her. They're all poems rather than letters. But there are poems on climate change in that book, which have been written before 2015. My next poetry book is, I've written one that has been published this year called Patient Dignity, about my response to the pandemic, and which is a lot about climate change and what we have done to bring about the pandemic through deforestation and global warming, which has led to global warming. And my next collection, which is with the publisher, is called Habitat. So I think, yes, for me, this talk is very important. I am very grateful to BNA for inviting me, because it made me go back to some of my own work and also made me realize that rivers are more important than ever. Production needs to benefit the whole world. We cannot continue to have haves and have-nots in the world. We cannot talk of a migrants crisis, but we can talk about the fact that we are displacing people through unequal distribution and through the desertification of this green planet. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think that does answer very well, Bashabi. So sorry. My connection just went a little funny there at the end, but yeah, I heard the vast majority of that answer there. But that actually brings us to the end of our question and our discussion here, which has been, absolutely wonderful. And, it would be us who would thank you for actually coming along and doing this wonderful talk with us today. So now that we're coming up to the close here, I think that will bring us to a close this afternoon. And before we part ways, I'd like to thank you again, Bashabi, from all of us here at V&A Dundee and beyond for the remarkable reading this lunchtime. And it's something that's very close to the heart of many Dundonians, so I'm sure they've taken a keen interest in this. And we hope that everyone watching here today has enjoyed this afternoon's talk. And yeah, do keep out the lookout, because we do have a lot more enthralling events to look forward to. Our lunchtime talks themselves will be taking a little hiatus for the festive season, but we'll be picking up our lunchtime talks around about back in February time. So all I have left to say is thank you again, Bashabi. Thank you to everyone for joining us and getting involved today, and for your wonderful questions, and to our members, donors, partners, and just all the folk behind the scenes who are here today. And everyone again, have a wonderful afternoon, and yeah, we hope to see you again in future.